sound check. Can you hear me in the back of the room?
Yeah.
All good.
I'm in front of the room. I don't know. Why did I say yes?
You're a mind reader, James. All right, so I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to come talk. And obviously, I'm going to be talking about packaging and the Gone girl with the dragon tattoo on the train. So, but first, a little bit about my background. He mentioned A9. I actually first met Steve and James when I was at Sun Microsystems, involved in some of the open source projects there. I started my career as a software engineer, so I was once a developer. Then I moved on to manage engineering teams in the operating systems group at Sun, and then into product marketing and product management roles the last 10 years at A9, which is an Amazon subsidiary in Palo Alto, as well as Quantum. And you can find me on Twitter there. So I've worked in different technology spaces, but it really made sense to come here and be here just because so much of the work I've done has been with developers and for developers. So back to this title. I'm not going to be starting with some personal story about a dragon tattoo. That's not the point of this talk. But instead, I do want to, before I dive in, just to kind of explain to you how I came up with this topic in the first place, because I always think it's interesting to hear from a speaker about how they got there. So when I was working on the abstract for Monki Gras, the folks at 538 published an article titled "The Gone Girl with the Dragon Tattoo on the Train," and it was based on a Goodreads publication of all the bestsellers that are out there that have "girl" in the title. And so it just struck me as interesting because I had read some of these books and I'm just this avid reader, and so all of a sudden I was desperate for a title that was memorable and catchy, and in fact somebody already walked up to me today and said, "Hey, you're the one with that really funky title." Well, so it accomplished its goal. So there I had a title, but I did not know what the heck I was going to talk about. Something to do with packaging, but what? So then I did what a lot of creative people and problem solvers do. I started with a blank sheet of paper and a pen. And I figured, okay, I can come up with something, right? And I ended up with this. And it's a mess. It's absolutely a mess. And I don't know if this happens to any of you ever when you're trying to come up with an idea. But from here, if you could read the handwriting, which you probably can't, I could have gone in 150 different directions. So I still was no closer to what I was going to talk about. But I finally centered on this question, which is exploring how the packaging of ideas and information and stories is changing and what that means for all of us. I thought for a while about talking about how we used to create sparse packages in SVR4 to enable patches, and I just couldn't get excited about that. So I'm going to talk about ideas and information and stories and how the packaging of those things have changed. And I thought we should look at it from 3 different lenses, 3 different angles. So the first is production and creation. How has packaging made production more efficient in some areas? How has packaging enabled people to reduce cycle times in getting from when the content is ready to getting it into their audience's hands? So that'll be lens number 1. And lens number 2 will be looking a little bit at distribution and reach and how people are able to get their ideas out there into more people's hands as a result of changes in packaging. And then finally, we'll look at access. So James mentioned that I worked on user experience a bit when I was at A9, and I absolutely care about how people interact with whatever it is. Their products, their technology, the ideas, the information. And so I thought we should look at, convenience of access, timing to access, speed of access, all sorts of different kind of angles and questions you can look at here. And this picture, oh shoot, I shouldn't have the little footnote there. I was going to ask if anybody recognized it. You actually did. You're not just faking me out because the little footnote at the bottom. There you go. So it just made sense. This is the George Peabody Library, for those of you who can't read it, at Johns Hopkins University. And it just made sense to use an image from one of those places where we traditionally got access to information that we needed to do our jobs, and to start from there. So Sarah Kay is a really phenomenally good spoken word poet. And in getting ready to come to this talk, I was watching come to this conference, I was watching some TED Talks, and I rewatched her TED Talk titled, If I Should Have a Daughter. And it starts out with, if I should have a daughter, instead of mom, she's gonna call me point B. And it goes on from there, and it's really, really, really powerfully good. But in that talk that she gave, she said something that really struck me as I was figuring out, what the hell am I gonna talk to you guys about? And she said, I show up to each new poem with a backpack full of everywhere else I've been. So this is actually a picture of me in a place that Ariana will recognize if she looks at it carefully, wearing a backpack. Oh, it's kind of dark, so maybe you have to come close. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through 3 examples of things that I've experienced or I've observed in recent years and kind of think about that question of how the packaging of ideas and information have changed. You with me? Are we good? Are y'all pumped? Okay. So the first is books. And it turns out that I'm old enough that selfies weren't really a thing when I was a teenager. And I didn't have a cell phone with a built-in camera. I didn't have a cell phone at all, for that matter. So I couldn't dig up some picture of me carrying a big stack of books. So this is stock photography. Sorry about that. But there I was, 13-year-old, needing to get books to read, and the best recourse, and kind of the only recourse really, was to go to the public library. So I lived in Concord, New Hampshire at the time. And public library, accessing books, not that bad, but when I look back on it, what a pain in the butt, right? So it was about 1.5 miles down a really steep hill to get there. I live in California now where the climate is kind of dry. New Hampshire's buggy and humid and hot, and I had to walk down this big hill and go to the library, and it took me about, this is a picture of Concord Public Library, probably took about 35 minutes to walk there. And then I'd spend about an hour there. If I knew what I was looking for, I could use the card catalog. If I didn't, then I'd have to browse the stacks and just hope I ran across something that was interesting, maybe a new author, maybe a new series. Maybe I could ask the librarian, but she wasn't in tune with what a 13-year-old girl would want to read. And no, I wasn't reading programming books at the time. I was doing all fiction all the time. Didn't even know I was going to study computer science until many years later in college. So it probably took me about 2.5 hours a week to go through this experience, but that's okay. It wasn't really a problem, or I didn't perceive it as a problem at the time. It just was the way it was. But think about it. That library at the time, and I looked this up, had about 125,000 books in circulation, many of which I wasn't interested in. So didn't have great selection for me. And discovery was, I didn't have any of those capabilities of, people who liked this book also liked, right? There was none of that kind of automated recommendation engine to help guide me through to discover new authors. And the library was open, not always. I'm a night owl. I was a night owl even then. Certainly couldn't get books late at night. On Sundays, it was only open from 1 to 5:30, and forget about holidays. And then I was limited. My capacity was limited, not by how fast I could read, because I read fast, but by how many books I could carry, and from my chin down to here. So it wasn't the best experience compared to what I have today. I love my Kindle, and I love this massive selection I have of books. I love all of the suggestions, those personalized suggestions about discovery, and I love the 24/7 by 365, the fact that I can download a book at 4 in the morning, I can get it in seconds. As long as I've got Wi-Fi, I can put a whole bunch of books on my Kindle before I hop on a plane to come here, which is exactly what I did. And it's over there in my bag, and it's small, and it's tiny, and it's light, and I'm all good. And the part of me that took a year off to write a book once really loves what it's done for publishing and how some of those barriers to entry for aspiring writers have been removed, right? And I don't think it benefits society when control of what can be published and what can get to the audiences rests in the hands of an elite, which it really used to do. And I think this has changed dramatically. So the ebook technology format, I think, problems aside, has been a force for good. And there's one that I particularly like. I wear glasses. My eyes get tired at the end of the day. I love the larger font sizes. I love that ability to configure it.
And also, there's the font for dyslexia on Kindle.
I didn't even know about that. Very cool. So I think there's a lot of good things that this packaging format has enabled for all of us. So now I'm going to tell you a second story. So The Economist. How many of you read The Economist? Okay, print, online?
Print.
Mostly print? Okay. So I think it's an awesome magazine. But what you may not know is that last December, actually it could have been October, November, but last fall, The Economist launched on Snapchat Discover. So how many of you use Snapchat? Cool. So I have teenagers. And it turns out Snapchat is, of course, used, at least in the United States where I live, by all of the teenagers that I know. And it's a great way for me to at least stay in touch with my daughter. My son will not Snapchat with me right now. But he says that his birthday gift to me later this year will be that he'll finally connect with me on Snapchat. So we'll see about that. But The Economist has actually done a big social media push in the last couple of years. And one of their ventures is they did a bunch of experimentation and decided to launch on Snapchat Discover. And I just thought, well, that's interesting. Why are they taking their news and their coverage and their articles and packaging it in this new way? And I thought the question, Lucy Rohr is the Snapchat editor for The Economist. I thought the question she posed was a really interesting one. Why does this really old, established publication, why are they going after a messaging app whose unique value are these disappearing images and disappearing videos? Well, before we try to answer that question, let me just show you a few images of what it looks like, because I'm assuming most of you haven't seen this yet. So each one of these is a screen snapshot taken on my iPhone a couple of weeks ago. If you were to go onto the Snapchat app right now and look at the Snapchat Discover screen and look at The Economist today, it's actually got a completely different set of articles that are all themed around the US presidency because of the inauguration. And there was no way in hell I was putting political images up here and US presidential ones. So here we go. Do animals experience emotions? And it turns out that the approach The Economist is taking is not to try to republish all 80 pages of a magazine on Snapchat with these disappearing videos and images, but instead, every weekend, to create a new issue, kind of fits with their weekly model of publication, that'll have a set of themed stories. And they're picking stories that lend themselves to being told in a visual manner. And they will not republish all The Economist content in this way. It'll be unique and kind of exclusive to Snapchat or building on top of what they've done in the print magazine. So here, they're smaller here, but I wanted to give you kind of more of a feel. And this is just one of the stories from that particular edition. And around the question of do animals experience emotions, these images are all from the piece about whether elephants experience emotions. And it tells the story of this elephant named Grace that seemed to be comforting and helping and grieving for the matriarch of the elephant family who was dying. And so it was really interesting. And then it followed with another story about a chatterbox parrot and another story about a dolphin that imitates humans. And it was compelling enough that I went through all the screens and I read all of this. But that still doesn't answer the question about, well, why is The Economist doing this? Why are they packaging up content in Snapchat? Why does this matter? And this quote from someone who's an SVP of their strategy team answers it right there. And I can sum this quote up with one word, and that's millennials. So they can't deny the power of the Snapchat generation. It turns out that The Economist has a brand awareness problem in North America, and according to Pew, 60% of people in the United States don't even know what The Economist is. And so their hope is to create that brand awareness and to delight and capture the attention of these millennials now, even if those people don't end up becoming subscribers for another 5 years. So this is very much a long play on the part of the team at Snapchat. But I also think it's an interesting play because in addition to going after the millennials, they get to experiment with these new forms of content. And that may surprise them. And time will tell how it surprises them and how it changes how they think about how to communicate a story. Somebody in the Economist team said that if you think this doesn't make sense for us to be doing, think about the fact that we've been taking these complex issues for quite a long time and distilling them into this very compact, these very short articles, right, that take probably hours and hours and hours of research. I mean, James, Stephen, Rachel, you guys are analysts. You know what it's like to take a rich wealth of material and try to distill it down into an extremely short blog post, right? No, it's actually a lot of work. And so they felt like, hey, we've got the skills to be able to go do this. All of their social media efforts have been around buttressing their business model too. I mean, print advertising, obviously that business has plummeted, and so they've been doing a whole bunch of things on social media to try to raise awareness and to drive up a more sustainable subscriptions model. And I couldn't get my hands on the numbers for 2016, but the numbers I found for the second half of 2015 said they had actually driven up subscriptions by 31% year over year. Not bad by using social media. So for those of you who mock marketing or mock social media, it's actually a very powerful tool to connect with people. And then finally, obviously more so than print, it gives them the opportunity to experiment and to learn from those experiments and to kind of further refine on what can we do to reach our audience. So I do think this packaging of stories on Snapchat, I don't know, it completely grabbed my attention. As a side note, they also have been experimenting with Medium as well. And there's a Medium publication that is run by the Economist social media team called Severe Contest, if you're curious about kind of, and that's where they talk about these experiments that they've been running. So it's kind of where I've gotten some of my facts. And they've also just changed their approach and done a pivot on how they're using Medium as a publication as well. So you can explore that. So my third story for you is about a little piece of serendipity that I ran across. And I was completely surprised by this. I didn't expect it. And it was on Twitter, of all places. Twitter, the home of abuse and the home of all this controversy. And they've definitely had some challenges. But this was just delightful. So I don't know how many of you ran across Marcin Vicari's post, right, about this tweet thread. How many of you did run across it? Raise your hands. Okay, so probably less than a quarter of the room. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read just the beginning of this to you, okay? And I just want you to kind of hear it and share it with you, and then I'll talk about why I think it matters. So something magical happened to me today, and I wanted to tell you all about it. I'm driving from Barcelona to the edge of the Pyrenees. But my friend tells me to detour to the little town of Figueres for the Dali Museum. I don't know if I pronounced Figueres right. Did I? Anybody? No? I totally screwed it up? Okay, fine. Moving on. I don't know if I care much for Dali, but why not? The drive starts off on a wrong wheel when I realize I made a reservation for tomorrow. Fortunately, there was another car with automatic transmission, so I drive up and I park next to the museum. As I'm walking toward it, I see this sign pointing the other way, Museo de la Técnica. See, I can't speak Spanish. With a cute little gear icon on it. So this is a good example of, taking the other path. Oh, wait, no, sorry, screwed that up. I don't have internet because of an earlier snafu, a bad SIM card, but I had the foresight to save offline Google Maps. But Google Maps returns nothing for the museum. So I don't know where it is exactly. So I follow the sign's directions the old-fashioned way. I walk and I walk. The cute downtown slowly disappears around me. At some point, the signs stop talking about the museum. I'm thinking that maybe the museum shut down and they just forgot to update the signage. But I keep walking. And at some point, I find it. The entrance is so small, I could easily miss it. I was just lucky that it was on my exact path. But small museums are amazing too, and I didn't have any expectations anyway. And literally, the first thing that greets me is a bar lock typewriter, a glorious one with a gorgeous cover, and a non-shifted keyboard. and one can touch it. So I do, immediately. I'm typing on a bar lock, and this was already worth it. So I'm just going to stop there. It continues. I mean, I think I read you about 13 tweets, and it goes on for about 60 tweets. And he walks you through this whole magical, delightful experience. Now, he and I have corresponded, but I've never met Marcin, and I'm probably saying his name wrong too, even though he told me how to say it, but it's hard. He shared this story on Twitter because it was so delightful to him. It turns out he's a bit of an expert on keyboards too, and I think he's actually working on a book. I don't know how serious it is or when it'll come out or when it'll be published, but everybody I talked to found it to be a beautiful story. And I think part of the beauty of it was this slow reveal, the fact that he told the story in this lyrical, serialized way. So just like he himself didn't know what was around the corner as he was going through this experience, and nobody reading it knew what was around the corner either. And I was going to say that he ended up telling a story that wouldn't otherwise be told, but that's not true. I'm sure he would have told his friends, he would have told his coworkers, he would have told his family, but there's no way I would have heard about it, right? So he's been able to reach an audience that you wouldn't otherwise be able to reach because this platform is there and because it's so easy for him to have posted it from his phone remotely from vacation. And then the interaction with the readers is part of the magic. There were so many people that have struck up conversations with him and replied on Twitter or had conversations with him like I did, saying, hey, I want to go talk about this. He's been interviewed in podcasts as a result since, too. So it's definitely drawn a bit of attention. So packaging the story on Twitter, I thought, just was something that couldn't be done before. And meanwhile, on Instagram, and here's just a slight deviation, there's an account called Hey Harry Hey Matilda. So I was reading my alumni magazine, and it mentioned that there was this novelist who was publishing a story post by post on Instagram. And what she would do is take images and take text of her story and publish it kind of day by day over a 9-month period. And I started to read it, and I got hooked. Right? I just kind of wanted to keep following and find out what happened to these kind of dysfunctional twins. One of them lives in Brooklyn and is an artist and wedding photographer, and the twin brother is some untenured college professor in Connecticut. And it turns out that the person publishing this, she used to be a photo editor, so she's particularly skilled at taking photographs and matching them to text and doing a better job than maybe most of us would. But she used this platform on Instagram to reach an audience and to bring her characters to life and reach people even without having, a publication deal. So she went direct from creator to audience. She mixed her photography with the written word. It's another example of that slow reveal, that ability to tell the story in a serial way that you can't do with a traditional book. And there was a ton of interaction and comments from readers. And so she secured her audience first. She then secured a publisher. So in fact, the real book just got published 2 weeks ago. But this was not a PR stunt. She didn't have a publisher in the beginning. She was just putting it out there for the world to see, and it caught on. So when I think about, and I hope I'm going to meet your 18-minute deadline, but you can jump up and down and stop me anytime you want. I think about the ways in which packaging of these ideas and these stories has benefited us. From the creator-producer side, I think the new forms and mixed media is really, really interesting, but it's also important from a financial perspective that the cycle times have been reduced. And so therefore, it's less expensive to produce content and get it out there into people's hands. And the democratization of access, I think, is huge. It means more stories, more analyses, more pieces of content will come to life and make it out there as a result. And of course, the fact that we've increased the reach of these authors, again, there's a flywheel here. It all circles together. Now, from a consumer and usage side, I talked about it before, selection, discovery, immediacy, anywhere, anytime, the customization, and that the delightful forms, I think, lends itself to a new kind of user experience. And then we get more and more and more content to choose from. So I guess I do think that the best packaging for ideas and information enables convenience. Because if we go back to this list on the right-hand side, a lot of these things are all about convenience. But I think there's a but here too, which is as compelling as all those benefits are, I think we might have opened a Pandora's box, which is that we now have this plethora of information to deal with, that the technology and the platforms that make this information available are making it hard for people to figure out how to focus and how to choose and how to think. And I think one of the challenges that people in tech have over the next few years, few decades, however long it takes, is to figure out how to help people navigate through this and not lose focus amid all the things that are competing for our attention. How are we going to help people make those decisions? So that's the question I leave you with today. Thank you.